Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipson. Welcome to episode 150 of Sports Management Podcast. If you have ever learned anything from this show, please show your gratitude by subscribing to the podcast in your podcast app. And if you feel extra generous, leave a 5-star review. This will help the show grow, and the bigger the show, the bigger the guests. Thank you. Today's guest is Tim Holt. He's a seasoned sports professional with over 20 years of experience from the soccer industry in the United States. He has held roles such as President of the United Soccer League USL and VP of San Antonio FC. We spoke about how soccer has developed in the US, the change from working at a league to a club, why a captain should never abandon his ship, taking on leadership roles early, the importance of Beckham, Messi, and the World Cup to soccer in the US, and much more. Tim Holt, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Marcus, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's my pleasure indeed. And you are a soccer professional, you can say 25 years of experience in several different roles. Right now doing some freelance work. So let's start with what are you doing right now?
It's a little calmer maybe than it's been years 1 through 25, largely by choice. And I've been doing some consulting work domestically here in the sport, both with existing professional clubs and prospective professional clubs, hopefully with something to offer to them, both in terms of structuring clubs or efficiencies on and off the field. And have enjoyed that work. It's a very different day-to-day, probably, which is more sort of project-based, a little bit slower paced than where I've been, but kind of welcome in certain other ways, just in terms of the convergence with that and where life is at this point in the game. So enjoying this. I don't know that it's a permanent switch over just because of the enthusiasm that working in a club or with a league or a sports property brings forth. You can't really replace that being in it day to day and living it and all that comes with it. But enjoying this little bit of a change of pace very much here over the last, several months.
I understand that. But on the other hand, I think your services are well needed. I mean, soccer is getting really popular in the United States right now. MLS is more popular than it's ever been. And also, of course, the World Cup coming in 2026. So do you also feel that the interest for soccer in general is higher than ever?
Oh, higher than ever it's not even close, really. And I had gotten out of college right about 1994, which is when the last Men's World Cup came here in the United States. And look, it was a big spectacle. It's a world spectacle. And I think everybody knew that. The United States loves its big global events, the Olympics. But that's kind of how it felt at the time. 25 years later, with the World Cup coming here in 2026, potentially in 2027 on the women's side, things are just so radically different in terms of the state of the professional game, the state of the game at all levels. Now it's not just a couple million players, casually participating on the weekends and really nothing sitting on top of that, with the exception of some pro teams in that space. Like, as you mentioned, Major League Soccer's launched and grown. USL, which actually existed 10 years before that, but in a much different way, has evolved and grown. The women's game at the professional level is showing some stability, and all the way down, even through the youth. There's just been so much change, and evolution is probably the best word. We have, I think it's difficult when you have conversations with people outside of the United States to explain our structure and our landscape. It is not intuitive always, and it doesn't totally conform with how most of the rest of the world works. But there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think that some of those idiosyncrasies can be advantages for the United States as it continues to try to put itself as sort of a first world soccer nation competing in World Cups and the biggest events globally, which is kind of that frontier still not reached. But, to answer your question, it's just so radically different. I mean, I would tell people that I worked in soccer when I started, and they would tell me that was nice, but what did I do for a living? And, we've gotten to the point where that isn't always necessary to explain that this might actually be one's livelihood. So me and countless others are so fortunate to make a living, in the game. I think that we care about in this country. And for me in particular, being part of developing new structures, whether they're clubs or leagues or opportunities, platforms, is what it's all about. That's what I get the most joy out of. And I've been fortunate enough to be in a number of those situations over the past couple of decades.
Yeah. And I mean, there are some, if you pinpoint some events, so you mentioned the 94 World Cup, which as a Swede is a big event since that was the only time on the men's side when we actually have won something. Then you have on the women's side for your guys in the US, I mean, the women's have been so successful over so many years, and they have, I mean, on the men's side, not so much, but the women has really driven the interest, and I think a lot. And then, of course, you have some celebrities coming over, Beckham and now Messi. So how much have that helped, like, bump up the interest?
It all helps. So it all matters. So the 99 World Cup with the women, where they won it here and penalties, and it's an iconic moment. All these things move it forward. David Beckham signing in the early 2000s, when it didn't seem possible that a player of that magnitude in this era of American soccer would come still in his relative prime, matters. And so I think the biggest difference, though, now, those moments it's a big market, the United States. And I think because of that, commercially and in terms of the media spotlight, those things will continue to occur. And they're not always a great barometer of the growth of the sport in the United States. But during that period, those moments have led individuals to either invest in the sport, the men's game, the women's game, invest their time, supporters and the supporters culture, which was non-existent in the 90s, to the point where there's more permanence in our sport here. Again, when I'm speaking about that, I think I speak at the professional levels, the national team levels, permanence in venues now where there's, soccer, custom purpose-built football grounds in so many different markets, and not just at the Division I level and not just at the men's Division I level, but Division II men, Division III men, the women's game. So what's changed isn't those moments. Those moments help generate buzz, but then that buzz leads to things being done that don't get anywhere near the same attention, but are more important in terms of creating a permanence for the game. And let's hope that these leagues are all stable enough now that none of them are about to fold. But if they did, it wouldn't be catastrophic to the sport. Something else would grow in its place. And I think, we've reached that in so many different ways that you can, objectively measure growth in terms of the sport. And I think that's what's so exciting about the next 25 years that are ahead of us. Is it's an opportunity to build from a stable, robust platform, which, the first of my time, the first 15 of those 25 years was about survival at the pro level, all those fronts. We're out of that mode, and it's exciting. And then 26 and hopefully 27 will build that even further. And then, just excited to see what that looks like down the road.
For sure. And also, you said building it up and have this brickwork, but also the level of play is increased quite a lot. Like when Beckham came over, it was like, also seeing his documentary, it was it felt more of a spectacle. He came over and, the sport was so new and the level was so different from Europe. I mean, now it's a completely different ball game, literally.
Your observation's great. And it's kind of coming bi-directionally. It's coming from a higher volume of talented international players coming to play in this country, many of them in their prime, that could choose, if they wanted to be in the top 5, 6, 7 leagues in the world by choice. That helps raise the level. And then I think at the same time, you're seeing a generation of American players developed. And I'm not just talking about the top half dozen guys on the national team that are all household names at this point. That's important. But there's a level of depth below that, probably starting around age 23, 25, mid 20s and below. And it's not stopping. That's feeding things from more of a grassroots foundational level. So you bring those two things together, and it's just a really exciting moment. It's tangibly raised the level of play, not just in Major League Soccer, which I think is what most people would see around the world, or with the national team, which, is in an exciting moment. National teams, I should say, but down in the levels where I've spent a lot of time, the Division II levels and their academies are also developing talented young players that are going to move on either domestically here or abroad and have a number of different pathways and opportunities to do that. So I think those things are all affecting the level. And then the one, of course, that you can't overlook is just increased investment in the sport by club owners that are willing to, make that spend money on things like academies and, and player budgets in a way that is very different from what it was in the past. And sort of they're betting on the sport and the growth of the sport rather than just doing enough to keep the doors open. So I think we've hit a pivot point in terms of that. And then when it all feeds together, then you can see the growth.
Let's back up about 30 years. You said when you graduated college, and then in 99, you started working for USL. So after graduation and those couple of years up to that job, how was it like? How did you get that job?
So like most people in their early 20s, especially when you look at against the backdrop of MLS was just kind of starting, but there were maybe 8 to 10 teams and things were all over the place. There weren't a lot of jobs in soccer, full-time jobs. And there weren't even a lot of academic programs in sport management or sport administration or whatever labels are being put on these days. It was kind of for anyone that was growing up in that period, a blaze your own path type of situation. There wasn't exactly a pathway to be able to do that. And I kind of, splashed water for a little while in terms of those years, doing coaching, running tournaments, running indoor soccer facilities, whatever paid the bills, but making sure that I was around the game, that I was around people constantly, that I was learning different things that I didn't know before. You don't know anything when you come out. You've played and you're a player and you don't even know what happens behind the scenes, or you have a coaching background. And then you start to get an understanding of some of this other stuff. So I bounced around from Pennsylvania to Florida to Michigan, trying to figure out what my thing was. And, like most people that, get a break or that first opportunity that they can look back and point to, I got one in 99, as you're alluding to with the USL, or was then the USISL, or, whatever letters were there, which was, kind of moving from, like a, operated out of the garage type of league by someone who was just really special in terms of his vision, Francisco Marcos, who founded it, into something that was just a little bit more professionalized and still a long way to go. When I joined that organization, it was very flat and there was a lot of opportunity to be involved in a lot of different things. And that was perfect for me at that time. Energy was in abundant, and you learn a lot of different ways, and you go from there. And that kind of is what launched it. But if I hadn't done all those things, and there are probably 6 or 8 different things, and it might have lasted 6 months or a year from the time. And one of those was go back and get a master's degree, in sport administration, one of the programs that was doing that at Florida State University, just to get different perspectives on things. I wouldn't have been prepared to take the opportunity that I was afforded in the late 90s the way I did, in terms of intellectual maturity, just understanding maturity in general, just understanding that was special. And I needed to prove my ability to help make an organization better. And I really enjoyed it.
I think that's a good lesson also, because there are a lot of young people listening that they might be early in their career or during their studies now to, as you said, like to reach that type of maturity and to do these type of maybe shorter jobs and not give up and continue the grind, because maybe an opportunity will arise a little bit later.
Keep going. Just keep going. I mean, you're starting really, for most people, they're starting somewhere near zero in terms of experience, in terms of network, in terms of skill set. But what you have is this great energy and passion and enthusiasm for it. And don't discount that, because that can go a long way. And not everybody has that. So you just keep going. And, there's no guarantees of anything for any of us in terms of opportunities that will come. But if you're consistent, persistent, and you just keep going, then things have a good way of working out. And the hardest part at that stage of the game, as you probably can relate to as well, is just try not to get frustrated with that. You're ready to take on a job 3 levels higher than the one that you have tomorrow. And you know that you do a great job at it, but no one's ready to give you those keys yet. So just trying to be patient, patience relative, but understanding that it's a long race. And if this is really what you see yourself doing and are prepared to put the time and the effort in, then you can be afforded that patience, because it's a 20, 30 year race, not a 2 to 3 year race.
For sure. So at USL, you held several executive positions, COO, Director of Pro League, Executive Vice President, and later President for the last couple of years. You were still quite young in these executive positions. And I read when I did some research here that there was someone who said that you were mature for your age, so to speak, and that you took on that. So why do you think the maturity and that mentality to go after these type of roles were in that age?
It's a great question, Marcus. Whoever said that, it's a great compliment. I'm not sure how correct it was. I didn't have a choice. I was there for 4 or 5 years, grinding, as you call it, and showing up for everything, and not stepping into lanes that I wasn't invited to become, but going to league meetings, going to federation meetings, going to MLS events, anything I was allowed to do, I did, whether it had anything to do with what I was doing from a job description standpoint or not. So when I took over the role of having to run the organization day to day, which was 2004, and I think I was 31, 32, relatively young, but not super young. I didn't have a choice. Like, to do the job, you have to act with a level of professional maturity. And I think from there, it comes down to your values and fundamentals. How do you want to be treated? How do you treat people? What's your style of being effective to get things done? And mine's always been, trying to, if I'm in a role like that, you look at it like a team captain or a coach, where your job is to try to help the others be successful and the group to be successful. So, you just kind of go after it. And look, there were, fits and starts and ups and downs during that period of time. We went through, I think, 2 or 3 different ownership changes. When I had stepped into that role in 2004, Umbro was still the majority owner. And then they were acquired by Nike in 2007. Nike owned it for about 2 years and then, essentially said, look, we do a lot of things and we do them a lot of things really well. One of those is that we don't own and operate professional sports leagues. So they went through a process of divesting that ended up with actually still the current owners are and lead investors in the USL now, group fronted by Alec Papadakis, who I had known a little bit through his involvement in the sport and our leagues. And yeah, it changed a lot over that. So that kept the challenge fresh, going through all those different times. And the next thing you know, it's been closer to 20 years or 15 or 20 years that you've been with the organization. Really, the only thing that I had done or really done in a corporate environment, if you'll call it that, professionally, and felt that it was time to find a new challenge. Because I think in leadership, it can get stale. Like, even if you're there, there's a sameness of it. There's a sameness of it for you in terms of what the day-to-day or the challenges are. And then also for the organization, and different life cycles of businesses call for different leadership skills and people. And it felt like a good time. It was stable. It was in a really good spot. Things were on the ascent. And it felt like, this is a good time, for everybody to kind of move on and see what's next at this stage of the game, without specifically knowing what's next, but trusting the process, if you will, if I can borrow an NBA term.
Was it important for you that the league was in a stable state for you to move on?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, look, there were times, during that 15 years where you go through some hard times. And we went through some hard times as a league in terms of critical mass of teams and viability of divisions. And sure, at that point, you can be like, well, now would be the time to leave. But no, I think, in terms of what you committed to and the people that are relying on you that put you in that position, it absolutely isn't the time that you leave. You leave when things are good and it's set up well for the next individual or leader or person or people to come in behind you and build upon that. And so, try to keep that in mind and push you through some of the periods where you feel like, it doesn't feel great. And again, I think just kind of like we were talking about earlier, just keep going, keep pushing, keep grinding. And a lot of this stuff is cyclical. It kind of changes as time goes. And, if you stick with it and you're making the right decisions and are on the right path, then you got to trust that a little bit.
But that speaks to your character, I think, and your leadership ability, that you don't abandon the ship, you stay on it. And I mean, when you mention it now, it sounds obvious that, of course, you stay on and you don't leave during the hard times. But I don't think that goes for everyone. So I think that speaks a lot to your leadership qualities and your personality.
I appreciate that. And as you know, and a lot of the people that you've had on, and probably follow your podcast know, that's not always clear in the moment. Because, the warning signs are going off, and sure, you're worried about the organization you represent, but you're also worried about yourself and your career, and what happens if, you can call it going down with the ship, but what if the ship goes all the way down? Do I bounce back from that? But again, I think it's good. You have clarity sometimes when you're outside of the situation better than you would in the moment. But again, it's never just one person. It's a group of people that are kind of continuing to go on. And the folks that we had that are all over American soccer and leadership positions these days. So obviously I was fortunate to be around a lot of talented people that got that and love where the USL is today. Obviously it's thriving and doing things that I think a lot of people didn't think were possible in terms of pushing the game forward and in tandem with Major League Soccer on the men's side, give a lot of strength and breadth and depth in terms of number of markets and number of performing professional club markets here, unlike we've seen in this country ever.
You brought up a great point there with the cooperation with MLS. So for those maybe in Europe and Asia or in Africa that they are not very, knows how the league system works. So you have MLS, right? It's a closed league. And then you have ULS and different division. Can you just go through that really quickly to explain?
Yeah, sure. No promotion and relegation. They are closed leagues. So I think just zooming back for a second, the U.S. Soccer Federation is an open membership organization, which doesn't really mean anything except in practical terms, which is that anyone that meets the criteria for membership in a certain category can be accepted into that category. So Division I men isn't a monopolistic situation where Major League Soccer can be the only one in there. If another group came in, American Premier Soccer came in with 10 teams and owners that all met the definitional criteria of a Division I pro men's league, they could also be a Division I men's league. And so you can have multiple things. They're closed leagues. There's not promotion and relegation because it is kind of close. So it's different, perhaps even radically different in a lot of ways. So some of the things that, folks around the globe might, take for granted about sporting merit and all those things are just not part of this. And so, for instance, we were with San Antonio FC, which is one of the clubs that I've been with and the one that I was with most recently. We won the Division II USL title in 2022. And in most countries, now you're in the top division. We got a really nice trophy and cup and medals and the prestige that goes with that. But, you're still tied with everybody, in the table going into the next season in Division II. On the flip side, if you finish last place, you're not going to Division III. Look, there are pros and cons with all of this. I think, the more traditional model would have a lot of benefits. There would be a lot of benefits, I think, on a macro level that the country would enjoy about new investors and ambition being part of this, being thrown into it. I think the historic concern from, American soccer leaders has been that it will disaffect stability. It will create instability, which will deter highest level investors from building a stadium or investing to start a club. So, and having done it, I can see it from all sides. I think this is where we are because this is where it evolved into. If you go back 100 years ago, I'm sure it would, and you could start it and say, okay, then it would probably be based on sporting merit. And if you went into you went into England today and there wasn't anything in there and you started it, I'm not sure the leagues would be open. So we are where we are at this point. Nobody can go backwards in time and affect that. All you can do is continue to evolve that in ways that make sense. But when you do that, all the stakeholders have to be considered, including the owners of the clubs that are investing, but including the fans and the supporters that are investing millions and millions of dollars in this. And so all of them matter. Right now, things seem a little disconnected on that front. So it's hard. It's hard to explain to people how it got that way. Why is it that way? Why don't you change it? Should you change it? Again, any of us could talk about that stuff for hours, which is good. It's good. It's good discourse. By the same token, it's imperfect. Our system right now is imperfect. And some of that imperfections does negatively impact the health and the growth of the sport.
Yeah, and I mean, I see both sides, right? There are positives and negatives with having the league open and closed, as you said, with the stability. That's what we can see in Sweden. If a smaller team does really well and they advance to the highest level, and then they don't have the arena to build this, and they have to spend a lot of money for arenas and safety and everything that goes around it, and then their economy is not in that, their finances is taking a hit, and then maybe they are relegated, and now they're in a lower league with a way too big stadium. So, I mean, there are pros and cons with both ways.
There definitely are, and I don't know that there's any sort of utopian situation. Yeah, I would say that it's things aren't perfect here, but most people would say things aren't perfect in their country's domestic leagues, and there would be things that they would love to change about those things too. I think we're all just trying to figure it out on the fly, and as things continue to move forward, I think just again having bottom line healthy clubs that take into consideration partners and the fans and the supporters is of paramount importance, and something that I've tried to keep focus on when you're in the weeds, so to speak, with trying to make decisions about any number of different things that affect leagues or teams.
Yeah, and one thing that does impact is the expansion process. That was MLS had an expansion process when you were in San Antonio, right? So how does that affect the club when you were there?
Well, I think it it was obviously a source of frustration or consternation for those in San Antonio. When I came in there and the Spurs, San Antonio Spurs, the NBA club they bought into soccer in San Antonio. They took over the purpose-built soccer stadium, about 10,000 fans, and bought a USL team and started operating, which was an exciting moment because the ultimate objective was to bring Major League Soccer to San Antonio with the Spurs as the owners, with an expanded stadium of 20 to 25,000 fans, and trying to go about it the right way in terms of an expansion process formally that Major League Soccer had put in place, which was different from how they expanded before, which, and I don't mean to be flippant, was a little more ad hoc. We're expanding by 2 teams. We're adding this team type of thing, which was necessary for them in their growth process, or the first time they had started this expansion process. And we were part of it, I think, with maybe 10 to 12 other markets and owners, some operating existing teams, some that weren't, that were in good cities. And we felt like we had a great case, as good as anybody's. I won't bore you with the details. All of it's on the internet. But, when you fast forward, we didn't get selected, but perhaps in part we didn't get selected because of certain rights that the owner at the time in Columbus had to relocate to Austin, Texas, a right to relocate to Austin, Texas. For those that aren't from Texas, Austin and San Antonio are about 70 miles apart, downtown to downtown, which sounds like a great derby and probably would be and is across 2 different leagues right now, but really didn't, from an MLS perspective, allow the Austin group, which, got started. If there was a San Antonio team, there's a cannibalization of, corporate sponsors, fan base, media attention, local TV, et cetera. And so as a result, as San Antonio FC has been in USL, it's been one of the highest performing clubs in USL on and off the field. And Austin FC's gotten off to a really good start in terms of fan support and engagement and its relevance in that market in Central Texas. I'd love to think that, while we go through those little details and hopefully not boring anyone to death and trying to stay out of the weeds on that, I would like to think there's a version of the future in 10 to 20 years in the next generation where those natural local rivalries that drive the sport everywhere else can be taken advantage of in the United States. Our country is so big. Geographically, it's UEFA. So, I mean, we're trying to do this to where San Antonio and Austin, Orlando and Tampa, Sacramento and San Jose can be in competition or have the ability to earn their way into competitions that are the same to drive those rivalries over time. How do we get there? I can't map that out for you right now, and it's all those stakeholders that we talked about before. But I think those bring the best out of American pro soccer. And we're starting to see it on the women's side now as they start to get critical mass. You're getting some legitimate, rivalries or derbies. Derbies, kind of confers that there's some geography involved in that, but not always. Sometimes it's just time and battles. And but I think that's where U.S. soccer can go. So look, disappointed. You talked about what happened there. Disappointed that Major League Soccer in San Antonio didn't happen as we wanted. I don't think that takes anything away from what a success story San Antonio FC's been. Amazing venue and facilities, amazing fans, high performance. Even beat, if you'll allow me, beat Austin FC in the first ever meeting and official game in the U.S. Open Cup in that same 2022 season at San Antonio, which certainly was a home field advantage. But the atmosphere in there was probably as good, if not better, than it was for the league final 5 or 6 months later because of a section of visiting fan. That's what it's about. So how do we get more of that? Not try to find ways to, stop that from happening in the name of something else.
No, that's really interesting. And of course, you mentioned that San Antonio FC and you were there and the success that you had, but you were a short period in Orlando City also in between for a short while. So my question, I guess, is you went from a league to a club. How was that transition?
Well, it was a learning experience. It was great, but that's what I was looking for. So to jump off of where I was earlier, when I felt like it was time to do something different professionally. After USL, I had all this experience from a league standpoint, and I actually thought I knew a lot about running a club because I'm around all these people that run clubs, and obviously I have all my own ideas. And I was fortunate enough to get Phil Rollins, who was involved with Stoke City over many years as a member of their board, and founded Orlando City. Was someone that I really had a lot of professional respect for and was a friend. When I left USL, said, I don't know what your plan is, but if you're interested, we can find a role for you here as we're trying to build everything up from a club standpoint. And I thought, great, there's no better person to learn from. I still feel that way. I learned from people like him, Paul McDonough, so many different people that were expert in their roles. My role specifically was to do all of the things to build and grow the club at top speed that nobody else had time to do. So it was project work. So develop a business plan and a model for an NWSL team. That became Orlando Pride within our time there. Start the business plan and a model for relaunching a USL team. That became Orlando City B. And find a satellite location. Work with the youth club and the academy to try to create some connectivity amongst all of those things. Start looking at what a training complex would look like if we owned it privately here in the land. Amazing. And I enjoyed it a lot. I realized how little I knew about what makes a club run and be successful. And so much more even than the league, the culture matters. The culture is everything. How you treat people, how you bring people onto an organization, who they are, and everything, not just your staff, but everybody, your supporters, the people that, work for the city and the county, everybody, and how they're treated. I've never seen anyone do that better than Phil Rollins to this day. He was gifted at doing that, but I've tried to keep that in mind in terms of what's important culturally in other places. Yes, you have to get all the other stuff right, financial plan, got to have a good, put a good side together, and it has to be competitive. But how you treat people and the culture that you create is number one. Good jumping off point, because I'd been there maybe almost 12 months and expected to stay if they'd have me for however long, carry through some of these projects operationally. And then the Spurs, the NBA Spurs, as I mentioned, got involved in. And I had worked with them when I was in USL. Who wouldn't want the San Antonio Spurs to own a professional soccer team in your league in the USL? But I could never get it over the line. And shortly after I left, then somehow they got it over the line. Obviously, better approach than me. But I spoke with them about what they were planning to do to launch it. The conversation kind of led into, and I probably took it there, was would I be interested in heading that up? So you get to go work for the San Antonio Spurs, which still, for in my opinion, are the best sports organization, at least in American sports, in terms of a lot of those things, including that culture that we talked about there. Start a professional club up with facilities that are in place, with the city and the county support, and with the ambition to go to Division One. Are you kidding me? How many times in your career might you get that? Usually it's zero. And if it's one, good for you. And as a family, we talked about it. Texas seemed like a brave move, but we did it and couldn't have enjoyed the experience more over, I guess, 8 years or 8 seasons. It went so fast. I think we had 3 months to start, put a whole roster together and name the team and get everything going. And And so it was fast from then. It never slowed down. We went through COVID as all of us did. And COVID kind of coincided with us not getting Major League Soccer and it going to Austin. And it felt pretty bleak. And, you worry about, they're going to keep, moving forward with this. And they did. And they stayed loyal. And we turned a corner after COVID and really just improved every aspect of what we did. We learned a lot, I think, in the first 2 or 3 years, but we were able to breathe and then come up with a little bit, of an adjusted, smart plan to sort of reinvigorate SAFC. And 2022 was just such an amazing year on so many different fronts. And then, tough act to follow. 2023, good. They're still in, a contender in the league that draws great crowds. And kind of like when we were talking about with the USL, I felt like, okay, this is, we're there now. This is established and this is something that can be built upon over time and is beyond whatever I'm doing this week to try to, keep it rolling. And they have some great people there. So they're all taking advantage of the opportunity to do more in those roles. And it'll look a little different. But I think that's good because it keeps things fresh. And so I think I just meandered from your question on Orlando City right into San Antonio, but they kind of feel like one seamless process for me, pivoting from being someone that had worked in the leagues and on federation boards and national soccer organization level stuff to being very focused on building a pro club at the lower level. And I think a point of pride in both of those situations, I really had nothing to do with it in Orlando other than just be engaged with it. What is just the youth structure, the academy structure and the youth structure in both places that really is so vitally important. It's the soul. You talk about the club and the culture and all that. The soul is kind of starts there. And if you can get that and then at some point connect it all together in a real way, not just on a spreadsheet, but in a living, breathing way where it's connected and it's one club rather than just a pro team and some youth teams and everybody's wearing the same laundry, but it's not really a club. I really felt like SAFC's sense of club was and is very strong, and certainly I'm very proud of being a part of putting that in place and hopefully that sustaining itself for years to come in that community.
I'm sure. And again, as we said before, that the captain doesn't leave the ship. You stayed on for a while as an advisor, right?
I did, yes. So, last summer, I moved on, but stayed involved, supporting executives like Bobby Perez, Frank Maselli, longtime Spurs executives, R.C. Buford, who have been there in any way that they needed my help, but also trying to stay the heck out of everybody's way so that they could do their jobs and make those adjustments through the end of 2023. And then just now in 2024, embarking on this sort of, advisory consulting special projects type of role here, but I didn't start any of that until I was done my time with the Spurs and San Antonio FC at the end of 2023. And I still I think a lot of us are this way that have worked for different teams. You still find yourself, you can't shut off the care button. So you still watch games and it's here. So it's certainly there. And the same with Orlando City and for USL in general and the sport in general in this country. It's given much more to me in terms of a livelihood, of a life. I met my wife in this, and we have 3 great kids that were all born in Tampa because the USL was in Tampa. I could never give back more than I've gotten from it over time. So that'll be a lifelong commitment, hopefully, to try to do that as long as anyone's interested in, what I can help them do.
Yeah. So, and also your father was a soccer coach, right? And I think that at least one of your sons, I think, is playing soccer. And as you said, you met your wife through soccer. So, and you played soccer as a kid.
Crazy. Yeah, my father founded a local youth soccer club in the United States in the Philadelphia area called FC Delco. In the late 1980s, they play in MLS Next Academy. So it's a strong academy. The Philadelphia Union has their own academy and has top players and non-professional team academies. Delco's still, 30 years on, really good. He did that. He coached scholastically and was just such an inspiration, is such an inspiration to me in terms of this. He was a high school history teacher and he coached. But I think if he grew up 25 years later, he probably would have coached professionally. There's so many different opportunities. And a lot of, from that generation, a lot of them were teachers or did other jobs and then they coached to earn extra money or just because they were so hooked on it and they were very good at it, but they never made it as a profession. So such an inspiration to me. And yes, my whole family's played. My oldest son currently plays college soccer at San Diego State, was part of San Antonio's academy program, and was fortunate to be in an environment like that. And there's so many environments like that are happening around MLS and USL now for players that are just growing up at the right time. It really is a golden period to be able to do that. My younger son plays plays club in high school. My daughter wants nothing to do with soccer whatsoever. There's way too much soccer overload and is in competitive cheer. And I love watching that because I know nothing about it. So it is not stressful. I watch her, and no matter what she does, it seems pretty impressive to me. And I give her a hug at the end, and it goes really well. So, and my wife's been amazing and support as that works, not in sports anymore, although she has a master's degree in sport management and works in the pharmaceutical field after this. So yeah, it's and I think you'll find, and this from the countless interviews you've done, you pick sports as a career path, as a vocational career, then you're all in. And maybe some people can do this and not be all in and do it at a high level. I've not found myself to be one of those people. So I have to be all in order to survive or be able to do this the way I feel, I need to be able to do it. And so again, the folks that I've worked with and for have allowed me to engage that mode. And so again, I always feel like it's work, no question, the time you spend there, but it doesn't really feel like the jobs that everybody that I went to college with ended up pursuing outside of sports. And so the pathway was a little longer and more winding, but ultimately very rewarding over time. And I think the cool thing is there's so many more of those positions and roles in sports for everybody here. And if you're young, it probably feels like they're all taken. And, how do I get in with that? But, cream rises to the top, and people that just continue to do a good job. There's such young people they bring such a quality to the table of understanding. They have their finger on the pulse of everything that's happening from a fan standpoint, from a supporter standpoint. A lot of them have recently played the game. They're just more connected to it. So as an organization, as a club, as a business, whether you're in the sponsor side, to not have those folks in your organization is a massive mistake. Just like a good team, the best is diverse, but diverse in every way in terms of generational and ethnic and every possible way, embracing the diversity to make sure that you don't have blind spots, because we all do. And it's important to keep that going. So those opportunities do exist out there. Young people without a lot of experience are valued. Kind of figure out what's your thing though. Like what do you bring to the table? Maybe it should always be hard work. And you may not know that yet, but it's a big deal. And I know in the experiences that I've had, embracing that, paid major dividends in terms of that. And, I think you just got to believe in good people when you find them as good people, even though they may not be the finished product yet.
Yeah, for sure. And there are options, to find work. You said it looks like some of them might be, most of them are taken, but there are Teamwork Online and also Pathways, a soccer-specific one to apply for jobs. So as you said, if you have the right mindset and you need to be all in, I think that's, when talking to, 140 plus people on this podcast, it's not a 9 to 5. I think that's important to know in sports. And it is a lot of work, but it's also really rewarding. And as you said, sometimes it doesn't maybe feel like a job, but it is.
Yeah, absolutely. You've nailed it. I think the one thing that has kind of got lost with all the technology, which has made it so much easier to connect and communicate across larger spaces and organizations you never even knew existed over time. One thing that is lost that is still valuable, or valuable to some that are in decision-making positions with these, is literally making a phone call, an old school phone call, or meeting someone in person. I don't think there's exact substitutes for that. It's like, well, how do I differentiate myself if 100 people have applied here and they all have resumes that are not dissimilar from mine? Can you get in front of that person? Can you get in front of that person on the phone? I guarantee you 100 people aren't calling behind their resume in this day and age. They're hoping that the strength of that does it. So, what's your advantage? How can you differentiate yourself to be able to do that? I think that either conversation, depending on where you are, or geographically face to face, finding a reason, finding an excuse, being resourceful enough to do it. If you want to work for organization X, figure out who's in charge of organization X and call them, reach out to them, email them directly. Don't just rely on the structures that are there. Those structures are amazing and important and still how most business gets done, but not all business. And so, I think, being persistent and trying things like that really can turn out results.
For sure, and I like that. And sometimes it's the smallest thing, as you say. Instead of sending an email to whom it may concern, if you actually take 10 minutes to see, as you said, who is heading up that department, or who is in charge of the recruitment, and say, "Dear Mister This" or "Dear Mrs. That," it shows that you went a step extra to find that information.
I had someone introduce himself to me at a game, literally at a match that I'd never met before, and great conversation. It ended up, and we spoke, and we weren't doing anything at the time. I was so impressed by this individual. Say, how would you even know who I am here in the stadium to be able to do that? And they said, well, I looked you up online, found you online, figured you'd be at the game, walked around the concourse, asked if you were here, and came up and introduced myself. Unbelievable, amazing, very impactful, much more impactful than 10 emails that person could have sent me, because we got to talk about that and we got to do that. That's hard. That's not. I'll say that's not easy. It requires effort. It requires thought, planning, and time. But it's certainly a way to get things done. Maybe we'll put it in the old school bucket, but it's a way to get things done.
You mentioned COVID. There have been some, bumps on the road in your career. So, or have there been any other? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Sure. I mean, COVID was a challenge for all of us in terms of, I think, the uncertainty. So if you remember being in COVID, it's a little easier now because it's over-ish. At least, the impact of how it affected sports and businesses, the worst is behind us, it seems. But yeah, that was challenging because of the uncertainty. So you're managing uncertainty there. Everyone's uncertain and anxious. People worry about job security. They worry about their health. Sometimes, in certain situations, you're back to work, but you're scared about your health. And so it was a very difficult situation to navigate. It probably pushed us into this virtual business world a little faster than if it hadn't had happened. So it's definitely one of those points. One of the other ones, it was my first year at USL. No, it wasn't. It was my second or third season. We were in the playoffs. So I'm running the league, every aspect of operations, the matches, the schedules, and we're in the playoff period. And it's September of 2001 and 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, we had 3 teams on planes traveling to away first leg playoff games in the league. And so, you talk about COVID being an uncertainty, but it's one that kind of came on us like a weather storm, where you could kind of see it coming at the end. And then it was just really bad and you're dealing with it. Well, this one just came out of nowhere, and there was no one knew what to do. So you're trying to track that. There's no playbook. How do we manage this? How do we manage our season? How do we manage if there was a full ground stop? How do we get Atlanta back to Atlanta? They were going to San Diego and they landed in Texas. How do we get them back home safely? Or do we? Is this over tomorrow? And they just keep so we had to manage through that situation. Look, it felt like an aftershock compared to COVID, where you cancel seasons and months at a time. This affected a couple of weeks, and then radically changed how we all travel, at least market to market in the United States. But that was one of those, not necessarily a personal challenge, but a professional challenge that you face a lot of times, when you're running these clubs. And those are circumstantial. And then the biggest ones that are hard, I think, no matter what, are ones that affect people's livelihoods and careers and lives. When you're in positions of leadership, sometimes you need to make difficult decisions about personnel that are around you, and separating, first class people and individuals with careers and lives and the same ambitions as you from what's best, what you believe to be best for the organization that you're with. And knowing that those two things are in conflict, and still needing to move forward and make decisions that are compassionate and just empathetic as you do them. And so, look, that's the least, letting people go, moving people on from positions that they want to continue to be on in, and in organizations is the toughest part. You try to be honest, but that's the most challenging thing I feel like I ever deal with. The rest of the stuff, you manage situations. It's not easy. You try to get information, as much information as you can, to be thoughtful and make a good decision, think ahead as to how it might play out. Those are the situations which for me were the most difficult, still will be, always will be, in terms of that, because bigger than your job or the sport. It's affecting people's lives, and people that in a lot of cases you spend a lot of times with and a lot of good times with for that. So and I'm not just talking about like any person in your organization, not just ones that are in bigger positions versus smaller positions. It's never easy. The only way to avoid that is to not be in positions that require that, you have to deal with those type of decisions. But, I've never felt like, it's it's part of what you signed up for. So I think, and we talk about moving, all of a sudden in 2004 into different situations, were the first time that I'd kind of been in that, other than coach player on a business side where you're affecting someone's livelihood. Yeah, that'll make you mature professionally pretty quick in terms of how those should be managed. But otherwise, again, it's a lot more enjoyable situations that you find fulfilling, and just kind of, sports problem solving. Our jobs aren't, like the medical field or anything like that. It's play. It's business, but it's play. And, I think there should still be a certain joy in that as much as you can retain it.
So in these uncertain times and in the tough times when you have to let go of personnel, and maybe we are in sports, maybe the performance on the field is not great and you need to take tough decisions. What's your North Star in that point? Like, what's the thing that still drives you when times are tough?
Two things. One is I think you need to accept and understand that is part of what your job is. And we talk about culture. There's no good culture without accountability. So accountability takes a lot of different forms. One of those forms is job performance. So if job performance is not at the levels established as adequate, being a professional soccer coach is the toughest job there is with that, because, you don't get the same latitude that most, if the ticket salesperson, might get more latitude in that. With coach, it's very public. Everybody's there to see it, and it's very difficult. But in any of those, it should be a similar approach in terms of how you do that. So you need to accept that doing that, evaluating individuals for their performance, not who they are, but what they've done and what they're doing holistically, like how do you affect all these things, and that could count positively or negatively, is part of your job as a leader. And it might be your most important job because you're the gatekeeper of the culture. And if you don't do that, it disaffects culture in a way that other people that are performing in their job get frustrated. So your high performers feel let down by you because people that aren't performing are allowed to stay in the environment. And then so you get the erosion of your standards. So you need those to keep the organization strong and healthy. And it's your job. You're the gatekeeper for that. Buck stops with you. So I think you take some solace when you're going through the undesirable exiting of member of the staff to be able to do that. And I think the other part is just, you're not operating in a vacuum. You might have an owner. In my case, with the Spurs, for instance, I had the chairman and the leadership, senior vice president of the Spurs, to help guide those decisions, to serve as a sounding board. I mean, amazing, because these guys have been doing this at a high level for 30 years. Have you thought about this? Did you think about that? Did you do this? What's your plan afterwards? Like all these things that make sure that you are thorough and exhaustive in that process, and people first, but also understanding what's necessary to be able to do that, and being able to be like, and then talk with them about, wow, that really was as bad as, I thought it might be, but off we go. People need to understand what the goals and the objectives are for the club. And if those aren't being met, then, potentially there's consequences. So there's sort of those for the organization that guide everybody, and there are those for your job. And my job with the Spurs, I oversaw the facility side, the sporting side, and the business side. So those three things, and they all had different sort of objectives and that needed to be met by the leaders there. My job was to make sure I was supporting the leaders as needed, that they were doing a good job, and to keep the three things connected, because that's a club. All three of those things being connected, 3 silos, not a club. So the sporting director needs to appreciate how his job affects the person that's selling tickets and marketing the team, and the facilities director. And that facilities director, the turf guy, needs to understand how, the quality of our training field and our fields and the pitch in the stadium affects team performance and fan satisfaction and all the above. And your job is to make sure everybody continues to know what everybody else is doing and how that affects that, and support them. When it's great and you got 3 great people in those roles, then, you can think ahead, but I think that's the main thing. And that all then comes down to the people that you have, and do we have the right people at the right time? And, more often than you're moving people on, people are moving on. Hopefully that's part of your job too, is that they're moving on to bigger and better things in their careers. If you can't provide that for them there, some of them moved within the Spurs to NBA level sort of things along the lines of what they were doing. Some moved into Major League Soccer, some moved to Europe, some moved to Liga MX, different sports like in Texas, the Cowboys. So some really cool things. And I think as much as winning or trophies or anything like that, seeing academy players, go off to college, sign a pro contract, seeing your pro players win, move to MLS, move to Europe, seeing all your other staff in the different areas get different opportunities because of the platform that was provided there is absolutely what it's all about. And if we're all doing that in 100 different markets in the United States, then there's no way that things aren't on the ascent for us here in the future. And again, I think that's what makes me excited, because I see so much of that happening in real time here, and it's just different. It's different than it was. And so this might look a lot different in 15 to 20 years. Maybe we can be in that conversation as in this sport, being in that elite group. Don't think we're totally there yet in terms of all that we do. We've closed the gap a little bit. Everybody's getting better. But I think, the sky's still the limit on that. And I'd be curious to see, in a quarter century, how far we've come.
Me too. And that's so interesting, everything there from the culture to the personnel. We talked about diversity, which by definition means that the staff is different. And how do you manage that to get the most out of your team? So, that's a topic in itself. Finally, I've kept you for, an hour plus here soon. I really appreciate your time. Is there something I haven't asked you yet that you want to mention?
No, Marcus, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I've enjoyed listening to a number of your guests talk about all the topics that we may have scanned over in deep detail, and the fact that you take the time and energy to create this platform to educate people that really care about this space, both young and older, different stages of their career life cycle is amazing. And I'm not sure there's anything quite like it. I hope you continue to do that, because I think, this exchange of good ideas and learning from people and their experiences is a really great platform. So I'm glad I'm aware of it. I've enjoyed listening to it. I'm humbled to be able to be a part of it. If somebody takes one thing away from, my story or journey, then it'll be worthwhile. And just thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Ken. Thanks for the kind words. And for sure, I've taken a lot out of this conversation, and I'm sure the listeners have as well. So, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportmpodcast.